The hearing will come to order. Today we'll hear testimony on the European Union's emission trading scheme. This hearing is both timely as well as incredibly important, and I'd ask unanimous consent that a statement from the European Union be submitted for the record. Starting in January 2012, the European Union will begin to unilaterally apply its emissions trading scheme to civil aviation operations landing in or departing from one of the EU member states. Under the emission trading scheme, EU member states will require international air carriers and operators to pay emission allowances and, in some cases, penalties. The emission trading scheme will apply to the entire length of the flight, including those parts of the flight outside of the EU. The EU is pressing ahead with its plans despite serious legal issues and objections by not just the United States, but by the international community. The United States presented its formal objections to the emissions trading scheme in Oslo just last month. Airlines, manufacturers, and general aviation operators around the world have also expressed strong objections to the emission trading scheme, and in fact, several U.S. airlines and the Air Transport Association have filed a lawsuit. Unilateral enforcement of the emissions trading scheme by EU member states on U.S. operators without the consent of the United States raises significant legal concerns under international law, including the Chicago Convention and the U.S.-EU Air Transport Agreement. There are also concerns that the emission trading scheme is nothing more than a revenue raiser for EU member states. Lack of transparency is a growing problem. The European Commission has provided no guidance on how the emission trading scheme funds should be used. Some EU member states intend to use the funds for whatever they want, as opposed to investing in research and development efforts with the goal of reducing carbon dioxide production by the civil aviation sector. U.S. air carriers and their employees have also pointed out that the emission trading scheme actually harms efforts to reduce civil aviation CO2 production. Airlines are forced to pay these allowances. They'll not have the capital to invest in efforts to develop alternative fuels, new fuel-efficient aircraft, or equipment needed to operate in a more efficient and environmentally friendly satellite-based air traffic control system. Finally, there are considerable concerns about the proliferation of EU member states' eco charges being put in place on top of the emission trading scheme. Questions have arisen as to whether the eco charges are consistent with EU member states' obligations under international law, and whether some of these charges may in effect double charge for the same emissions the EU intends to regulate under its emission trading scheme. Given all of these concerns, we believe that the EU needs to slow down, carefully weigh their plans to include international civil aviation in its scheme. We believe a better approach to the work within the international civil aviation community is to work with the international civil aviation community through the UN International Civil Aviation Organization. Since the EU shows no interest in working with the international community to address their concerns and objections and to seek a global approach to civil aviation emissions, we believe that the United States should not participate in their unilateral and questionable emission trading scheme program. Therefore, last week, we introduced H.R. 2594, the European Union Emissions Trading Scheme Prohibition Act of 2011, with bipartisan support. We intend to move this legislation in the near future to make clear to the EU and the international community that the United States does not intend to participate in a unilaterally imposed process. We want to thank the witnesses for their participation today. We look forward to your testimony. I know my colleagues will be joining us. There are caucuses going on as we've started this hearing. And I also invite all other interested parties to submit written testimony for the record. Finally, before I recognize Mr. Costello for his opening statement, I'd ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material in the record of this hearing. Without objection, so ordered, and I now recognize Mr. Costello for his opening statement.